Hey everyone, welcome back to Portal of Wisdom. I'm back today with another story for you. If you are new to the channel, like and subscribe and click that little post notification bell so you get alerted when I post new videos. And now on to today's topic. Today we are going to talk about a French trapper's gold cache in North Dakota. So in the early 1860s, there was a group of 14 Frenchmen that had been trapping beaver on the upper Missouri River and its tributaries in Montana. And they had mixed success with the beaver trapping, but they had fortunately stumbled into a remote little canyon stream bed where they just happened to find some gold nuggets in the gravels of the little stream. So their focus now was panning for gold. By the summer of 1864, they had panned several leather bags full of gold nuggets, and it didn't say exactly how big these bags were, but obviously gold is pretty valuable, so probably a fair amount of gold. So as the season came to a close, and they figured that they had better get out of the mountains because you know how the winters can get in Montana. So they figured they better get out of there before the snow came, and they better get back to the east and back to civilization. So they hiked back to the Missouri River, where they then bought a wooden plank boat for the journey down the Missouri River. And they floated downriver for a few days to Fort Berthold in North Dakota. So here they rested, and they paid for some more supplies and goods and food and ammunition and whatever they needed. And they paid, of course, with many of their gold nuggets that they had collected. So once it was time to leave the fort, a lot of the soldiers and people at the fort had watched the Frenchmen put their gold into a big wooden box or chest in the back of the boat, and they lashed it down into the back of the boat so it would stay put. So these 14 Frenchmen, they waved to the soldiers and they pushed off down the Missouri River. So the soldiers warned the Frenchmen about the Dakota Sioux Indians and that they were known to camp near the river and had also killed many white men in the area that they had run across. So a few days later, the wooden boat made its way into a wooded area near the shore of the Missouri, and it was said to be just past the confluence of the Knife River with the Missouri River, or maybe right about where the Knife River spills into the Missouri River. It sounds like it makes it a little bit wider at that point, and there may have been a cove that they steered their boat into. So they steered their boat into this cove for a little bit of protection and to come ashore, maybe camp and rest and stuff like that. But little did they know that there was a group of Sioux camped out just beyond the woods near the river, and a couple of Sioux warriors were hunting in the woods, and they spotted the approaching boat. So they ran back to tell their group of the approaching boat, and within a few minutes, numerous Sioux were hidden in the brush with bow and arrows and lances. And when the boat beached and was tied to a nearby tree, they attacked. So half of the Frenchmen were killed in the first arrow volley. A couple more trappers were quick to run down the bank, but were also cut down very quickly. 3 Frenchmen were able to survive by immediately jumping into the Missouri River and swimming unnoticed to the other side, where they hid among logs on the opposite side. So they carefully watched as a couple of Sioux warriors entered the boat and took the food and supplies, but they did not care about the gold that was in the chest, and they left that chest or box in the boat. So other Sioux warriors were scalping the fallen friends or Frenchmen and taking their clothes and boots. So the three Frenchmen, hiding amongst the logs across the river, they waited until the next day when the Sioux were well gone, and they started to make their escape south across the plains. And if they saw any Native Americans coming, they hid in bushes and ravines and anywhere that they could to be out of sight. So for days, they wandered and they were sunburned and starving. Soon, two of the three of them had died, and one Frenchman was left out of this group, and he was eventually found by a passing wagon train and eventually nursed back to health. So he then enlisted a new friend, I believe from this wagon train, and his son to help him go back to the confluence of the Knife and Missouri rivers to look for this boat with a chest of gold in it. And as they got to the boat, it was many days later, they were surprised that it was still in the same wooded cove and still tied to the tree. And as they hopped into the boat, a few screaming Sioux warriors popped out of the woods again, firing arrows at them. So the last remaining Frenchman was then killed at this point, and he fell into the river. The older gentleman that was there with his son, he was hit in the shoulder by an arrow, but his son had also been with him on the boat, and they dropped down low into the boat, and it sounds like they were able to draw their revolvers at that point, and they took down 3 or 4 of the Sioux before the Sioux then retreated into the woods, and I believe so 3 or 4 of the Sioux or so were killed. So the man and his son, they were able to escape, but the man did die soon from his wounds. So at this point, the son really had no desire to try to return for the chest of gold. And it sounds like his son might have been, maybe around, 20 or so, still young, but an adult. So he didn't really care to come back, and probably rightfully so, if he was already told that the Sioux attacked the whole party of the French once before and then they attacked again. Probably seemed like a death wish. So word of the 2 Sioux attacks did reach the fort that the Frenchmen had left, Fort Berthold, and they had learned about these couple of attacks, I believe, probably word of mouth from this son, or someone had come into contact with the son and this news got to them. So a trader, I believe like a goods trader that lived at Fort Berthold and knew of the great value in gold that was in the chest on the boat, he decided he wanted to make an attempt to get the gold. But he had a different strategy. So he went directly to the Sioux village, since this band of Sioux did come into the fort fairly regularly to trade. So he met with Chief Fireheart, and I guess Chief Fireheart may have recognized him from the fort, and so he wasn't a complete stranger for a white man. And he was able to get permission from Chief Fireheart to hunt in the area, and he was able to do so because he presented Chief Fireheart with a gift of tobacco and then asked him permission for him to camp and hunt at the confluence of the Knife and Missouri rivers. So the chief didn't suspect anything, and he took the gift of tobacco and he granted permission. So this trader that lived at the fort, he soon made it to the area and he found the boat in the shallows. It was still tied to the tree, but it was half sunk with only the front sticking out of the shallow water. So this goods trader, he made sure that no Sioux were around when he went ahead and he took his clothes off and he waded into the boat and he felt around with his feet until he found the wooden box, and he was able to determine that the wooden box was still full of gold and everything seemed to be intact. And he dove into the water, which it might have been just a couple feet under the water. So he dove into the water and he was able to retrieve all the leather packs of gold nuggets and bring them to shore. So he repeated this process until he had all the leather packs on shore, and he sat under a big cottonwood tree on shore, and he decided to dig a hole there and bury the leather pouches of gold nuggets. So he kept one out, which he stuffed into the saddlebags of his horse saddle or whatever. And so he loaded the saddlebags with as much gold as he could, and he buried the rest under this big giant cottonwood tree. So when he returned to the fort, he had a lot of gold to pay for drinking and gambling, and he lost no time playing cards and bragging about all of his gold, and it seems like he probably started to really rub people the wrong way. And at that point, he ended up getting into a disagreement with a man at the fort that he was playing cards with, and he ended up getting stabbed in the altercation, and he did not last too long, and he died. So everyone believed that he was the last person to know the location of the buried gold. But a few weeks later, Chief Fireheart came into a remote trading post, not the fort, a different trading post. So he popped in there to trade for more goods and supplies, and he offered to pay for his goods with gold nuggets that he pulled from a leather pouch. So a customer there named H. Larned, he asked the chief where he got so many gold nuggets. And the chief said he found them buried next to a large tree near their camping grounds, near where the Knife River enters the Missouri River. And the chief said that there were at least a dozen more bags of gold nuggets there. And the customer decided that his group would try to follow the Sioux south, and hopefully they would lead them to the gold, because this location was well south of this trading post. But to their surprise, when the Sioux left, they headed north toward Canada. So no one was able to follow the Sioux to their camping grounds, hunting grounds, whatever, and try to figure out where this was buried. So in 1887, Fireheart and his band of Sioux returned from Canada, and they returned to North Dakota and made their way to Fort Berthold. And they were there to trade some buffalo robes for some supplies. So at that point, he told stories while he was at the fort, and one of the stories was the massacre of the 14 Frenchmen, and how near that location he also found many leather packs of gold buried near the base of a large cottonwood tree. And he was questioned by the men at the fort, and he let them know that there were still many packs of gold still buried at this location, as he only took one pouch of gold from that spot, and they hadn't been back to that spot since they had headed north. So a couple weeks after his visit to the fort, Chief Fireheart died. So it is believed that the rest of the packs of gold are still buried near the confluence of the Knife and Missouri rivers, and they may be under some giant cottonwood. Now, it's hard to say if that giant cottonwood would still be standing. If it is still standing, it would probably be a monstrous tree. And some cottonwoods get huge and can live for well over 100 years. So it is highly possible that it could be still a giant tree there, and there could be some gold packs there. Of course, if the tree has grown a lot, it could be entangled in roots and stuff. But anyhow, that is the story of the 14 Frenchmen and their gold cache.